Welcome. Thanks again for joining me in this next episode in a series all about a unified approach to expression maps in Dorico that can apply to many different libraries. I've talked about the endpoint projects that I've set up for strings, winds, brass, and percussion. In the last episode, we talked about building a playback template, got quite deep into endpoints and that sort of thing. And here I want to talk about how and why this methodology offers so much flexibility to composers working with Dorico. Now, I'm presuming that if you're watching this and other videos on Dorico, that you work a lot in musical notation, and it's important to you that you're getting good mockups, good realistic mockups from professional sample libraries. For me, I work in a notation-first workflow. That means I start in notation. That's where I start all of my compositional projects. I don't always end there, and I will openly admit that Dorico is limited in its mixing and bussing features, for example. If you want to get into mastering, I always move stuff into Cubase. But Dorico is where I start the creative process, and it's often where I flesh out my harmonies, my rhythmic engines, my motifs. I look at my phrases and my structure. That's notation first for me, and I enjoy it. I love working in notation. It's visible and gives me a lot of visibility into what's happening in my music that I just love. So I like the notation first approach, and this system supports that directly by allowing us to get a great deal of flexibility out of Dorico without having to switch to another platform. Now, when I call this a unified sort of theory, I'm obviously robbing that term from scientific fields. But my point is that by creating a plan, a switching structure in an expression map that is not just unique to a library, but actually adopts and adapts to all sorts of things that are possible in a library, we wind up being able to create fewer expression maps that work with more libraries. Maybe even one expression map that works with all libraries. It would probably be a little bit convoluted and may not actually be the best way to go. Depends on how complicated your libraries are and how many libraries you're using. But let's take an example and understand why this approach gives us that flexibility to work with fewer expression maps and more libraries. Most string libraries, let's just take 3 string libraries. Let's take Spitfire, BBCSO. Let's take Orchestral Tools Berlin series, and let's take the Cremona Quartet from Native Instruments. Let's just take those 3. They all are going to support sustains, right? They're all going to have some kind of sustains patch. So that's a patch they're all going to have. And if they're all assigned to channel 1, and we just make sure those instruments always deliver that on channel 1, then our expression map only ever has to think about, well, sustains, natural notes, that's channel 1. Very simple, works with all the libraries. But then you get, this library has an accented attack and a bold attack, but that library has Consordino, so Orchestral Tools Berlin series does not have Consordino built in. That's a separate library. But the Cremona Quartet does have Consordino, right? So I'll create Consordino as an add-on, let's say CC value 3. So CC value 3, that's always Consordino. Now, if I send that to Orchestral Tools where there's no Consordino, I'm not going to get any sound. And it's going to tell me that that's not supported in that library. But instead of going through and saying, well, Consordino in this library, and this expression map is a unique value, but in this library, in this expression map, it's another unique value. Now I have to have different expression maps for each library. Whereas if I just have one expression map where Consordino is always CC3, violin is always channel 1, it's just a lot easier, violin is always port 1 and sustain is always channel 1. It's just a lot easier to maintain a smaller, lighter weight number of expression maps. Less to troubleshoot, less to figure out, less to demystify when there's a problem. In that way, this approach replaces key switches, which generally are going to be unique to the instrument, right? So key switches, you get to your instrument, it's like, oh, well, here's your catalog of key switches. Maybe they're the same as the other library you use. Maybe they're not. Many libraries will allow you to reconfigure them. That's true. So you can go about doing that. But this approach, although you do generally need to reconfigure some things in the instrument to make sure that Consordino shows up on channel 1, it is important to realize that taking the time to reconfigure your key switches still lands you with a problem of key switches in your MIDI. Then you take your MIDI, you export it, you give it to an orchestrator. The orchestrator's got to clean all that stuff out so that they can just orchestrate, right? Or you, on your own, bring it into your DAW because you want to drive a synth with it, and you're getting all these low-end frequencies from bass notes, which are actually key switches. You have to clean all that stuff out. With this approach, you don't have to do any of that. So you're going to probably put the same amount of time into reconfiguring your key switches as you would to configuring the instrument to work with your unified expression map. But then you also have the advantage of there's no key switches in your MIDI. Everything's working reliably, and you don't. So it's not a lot more time. It's probably even less time in my experience. I've gotten pretty good at it, and I can do it very efficiently now. And I don't have to worry about key switches in my MIDI. Now, a caveat. This is the third item on my list over here: ports and MIDI CC required. The approach that I've outlined in this series requires that you can access individual instruments on MIDI ports. You can give one MIDI port to an instrument. And working in Vienna Ensemble Pro, VE Pro, makes that very easy. I've covered that in the previous videos. It's very easy to do, which is one of the reasons I love working in VE Pro. You can assign instruments to different ports in Contact, but it's just a little more limited. I'm sure there are other sample platforms that allow it. I'm not familiar with every one of them. If anybody wants to buy me a library, I can look into it for you. I'm always open to that sort of an arrangement, but I don't have every library, so I don't have an answer about this with every library. I just do know that I use VE Pro because it allows me to assign instruments to unique ports. And that's an important consideration if you're going to adopt the methodology that I've outlined in this series. Also, using MIDI CCs is not supported in every library. For example, the Cremona Quartet from Native Instruments. Many of Native Instruments' Contact instruments do not switch articulations with MIDI CC switches. Orchestral Tools Sign Player does, the CSS player does, Spitfire does. So there are many professional libraries that will allow you to do this. You can even blend between them in VSL in the Synchron player. But you do want to verify if you're going to go ahead, dive into the approach that I've outlined in this series. Make sure that you understand how the ports and the MIDI CCs and the channels are actually going to work with the libraries you actually need to use. And hopefully over time, there'll be more flexibility about this. I do suspect that, in the next few years, we'll see MIDI 2.0 mature and take more of a role in how these things work. And we may find some different workflows there. For right now, though, you definitely want to consider whether ports and MIDI CCs work with the libraries that you want to use. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit to the point of modularity and flexibility. I had mentioned this earlier, I think in the woodwinds or brass video about using MIDI CCs for condition-based articulation. So what is that? Let's take a look at what a condition-based articulation is. So here on my harp, I've got long, medium, short, very long, and very short. And a harp may not be a good example because there aren't so many different samples on a harp. There tend to just be natural notes. But what this means is that I can set these conditions where a note that is in natural, I double click on that to see what articulation it actually is. You can see that it's a natural articulation. So a note that is natural and has a length of long, that's going to trigger this action. Medium, short, very long, very short, okay? I can send that to a unique spot in my switching structure. And when that switching structure kind of acts as a container, for very short notes, let's say. On a violin, I might want that to be spiccato, whereas in brass, I might want that to be a marcato patch or staccatissimo patch. So by having that space reserved and kind of addressed, that this MIDI CC value on this channel represents a long note or a medium note. It gives me a container, a spot, a modular spot that I can drop any sample into. And then I know all my quarter notes, which are generally what medium notes will measure up to quarter notes, that all my quarter notes are playing that sample without me having to go into my notation and do all this trickery to, actually manually assign playing techniques to them. I can just know if it's a quarter note, it's triggered as medium. I can even see that when I'm looking, and let me switch into my desktop here. When I am looking in the playing techniques down here, right, I can see what's being registered as short, very short. I can see them displayed right there, and then I can have confidence, well, that very short, that has an address in my switching structure. Any sample I drop there, I can modularly change. So the switching structure doesn't have to change, but I can actually meaningfully work with deciding exactly what kind of sound I want to have on those quarter notes. So that is, of course, extremely flexible, and that's what I mean by modular. That's also built into this approach. You're not going to get that from reconfiguring your key switches. All right, so that's it for this lesson. I've got one more lesson in the series. I don't quite remember what it is that I'm talking about, but I know it's along the lines of tips oriented around making the most out of this structure and also deepening our discussion about how this structure can benefit you as a composer working with a notation first approach workflow in Dorico. So if you're new to the channel, thanks for finding me. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please do like and subscribe. Subscribing because I live stream often and post videos like this often. If you like my style, you like the stuff I've covered, you're going to get a lot more of that, I promise. And like it because it helps surface it in the algorithms on YouTube, gets me more of an audience, and that really helps me support the effort that I put into making these videos. That's going to be it for now. Post comments if you have questions. I'll get back to you, and I'll see you in the next video.